suspect!
Coming to get you, Bobber.
Hi guys, my name's Barry and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at Hellraiser 2 from 1988. Now, I don't think I remembered anything from this film like I did from the first movie, so I was getting into this movie almost like it was the first time watching it, and there was a recap at the beginning, which I do like for some film franchises, because not only does it refresh your memories if you haven't seen the movie before it for a while, but it also confirms that there's a connection between the two movies, which is always good, especially for a franchise that has so many movies in it. So it was a refreshing moment, and just to refresh your memories from the first movie. I felt like they were cheating a little bit because they used quite a lot of footage from the first film to maybe beef up the runtime for this one, but we do get to see some alternate scenes. I don't know if they were just cut scenes from the first movie, but we get to see more scenes of Julia, Larry and Frank. So it was again something refreshing to see, because we get to see some old characters come back from the previous movie. Something I didn't expect to see, especially so early on, was Doug Bradley in human form. I didn't think we were going to see the history of how Pinhead became Pinhead, and if we were going to see something like that, I was expecting to see that later on in the franchise, not for part 2. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it was just a bit of a surprise for me. The formula was there from part 1. This time you've got Julia, who's like the female version of Frank. In this one, she now has to get the blood to become Julia again, but only in this one, no matter who she takes, she still comes back. I don't know how they do this, but she still comes back as Julia, in the form of Julia as she was in the first movie. Whereas in the first one, Frank took Larry's skin and looked like Larry, whereas Julia could take anyone's skin and become Julia again. I don't know the ins and outs of how that would work, or if it was just a massive mistake, but she came back as Julia again. Kirsty's also back, but she has a role that I didn't really like in this one. She becomes more of a detective in this one, with one of her doctor friends trying to figure out what's happening. Something I didn't want to see, to be honest, because I don't really like the whole detective work in these horror films, but Kirsty is that detective in this one. We've got two new characters. We've got Tiffany and Shannard. This guy who has got the puzzle box and he wants to bring Julia back for whatever reason. And Tiffany is this mute girl at the start that's really good at doing puzzles, so he decides to kidnap her or take her, thinking that she's going with her own free will, to unlock this puzzle box so that the Cenobites come out. I don't know why he wants them to unlock it. I'm sure, or I thought he would have just wanted Julia to come back, but obviously Julia is stuck there. And I thought Julia would want the Cenobites to stay far away, but they want this puzzle box to be opened. But I think Shannard has got this other reason for wanting the puzzle box opened, because it seems like he wants to explore the world of the Cenobites. Everything felt so convenient when the plot was plodding along. Everything just happened to be where it was, and I think that was okay. I think the story itself was nowhere near as strong as part 1, so by making everything convenient, it just helps that plot and storyline move along for us as the audience. I think if they tried to overcomplicate things, we wouldn't be enjoying it. So I think I enjoyed the fact that it was so convenient. I think I could have done without the Tiffany storyline, and also Kirsty, unfortunately. I thought Kirsty was going to be a good character, but if we left Kirsty and her doctor friend out of this story completely, and the whole detective work, I wouldn't have missed it. If you kept Tiffany out of the storyline as this puzzle box person, I wouldn't have missed it. If they just kept it Shannard trying to bring Julia back, sort of like they did with part 1, maybe it would have been too similar, but it's the only part of the movie that I was really invested in. Anytime it swayed away from that, I didn't like it. But when it came back to Julia trying to get all the bodies to become Julia again, that was what I was invested in. There was some really disturbing scenes, and they upped the ante from part 1, but something that about this movie that reminded me of the acting in 80s horror films was it's really hard to act in an 80s horror film. Yes, you get a lot of bad acting in these films, but you get some really good acting in 80s horror films, because it's hard to do some of the things that they ask you to do. And this one was really hard to act in, but they all done a really good job. Just like part 1, we had very little Cenobites and very little Pinhead. I think we got more of Pinhead as a human than we did as Pinhead himself. Again, it's not a bad thing, it's just what I thought I remembered when I first watched the movie. I always thought it was the Pinhead movies, but it's not that at all. Pinhead is just one of the characters in the film that just has very little screen time whatsoever. I think humanising the Cenobites was a bad move as well, because I wanted them to be the bad guys, and they weren't really the bad guys in this film. Humanising them and giving them a backstory was the wrong thing to do for me. That's just the way I would go. I wouldn't want to give them that humanising backstory to make us feel sorry for them, but that's what they'd done, and it was a wrong move. The practical effects were astonishing. One thing that they've done so far, up to part 2, was give us some fantastic and very gory practical effects. Again, effects that probably can't be used today because they're just too realistic, and they're too lazy to do that today. So if anything, they kept up, if not made even better practical effects in this one than they did for part 1. The sequel added more lore to the franchise, but with every more detail and information that they give us, it makes the franchise and the story less effective. So yes, it's nice to know more about something, but sometimes the more we know, the less we like. Overall, I think it was still better than I remembered, but it wasn't a great film. Nowhere near as good as the first one, but all the aspects were there, the characters were there. I just think the characters weren't used in the way that I think that they should have been used. I know that Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, is still considered one of the better movies in the franchise, and I can understand why people think that, but for me, I think they had all the tools to make a really good Hellraiser movie. They just kind of missed the mark, but at the same time, it wasn't as bad as I remembered. So what are your thoughts on this one, guys? Do you think that it was better than part 1, which I know that some people do like it, or do you think it was just not as good as it should have been? As always, guys, leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.